I was hidden beside my son's garage for months, treated like I didn't matter. But during one dinner, when my daughter-in-law tried to shame me with a huge bill, I finally exposed the truth. My journey became one of those inspirational stories about dignity. Another reminder that inspirational stories often begin in the darkest places. Before we go on, if you still believe in your heart that God is watching over you, always working things out in ways you can't see, then right now, drop an amen in the comments. Because who knows? The moment you write it, a blessing might be slipping quietly into your life. I never thought there'd come a day when I'd be standing in the middle of some fancy restaurant in downtown Chicago, under that warm yellow light bouncing off crystal glasses, while my heart beat so hard it felt like everybody at the table could hear it. Me, a 67-year-old black woman with short silver curls and hands calloused from decades of working as a baker, just about curled into myself, when the server set a dark brown leather folder in front of me. He gave me a polite smile, dipped his head, and stepped aside for the next person. And just like that, every pair of eyes at the table turned toward me, as if somebody had just called my name for an award. But this wasn't no moment of glory. I knew that before the leather folder even opened, knew it before the soft chuckles from the in-laws faded away. I could feel the tension sitting right at the corner of my son Malik's mouth as he glanced at his wife Brianna, like he was asking her what he was supposed to do next. And Brianna leaned toward me, her voice soft as a breeze but loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Mother June, you can take care of the bill for tonight, right?" There wasn't a drop of joke in her voice. It was light, gentle, but hit every sore place inside me, like a velvet slap. I looked around the table. Maybe I was hoping somebody would laugh it off, say no, step in. But no, nobody did. Even the folks I'd never met before Brianna's parents, her cousins, looked at me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like, of course, I'd be the one paying for her father's birthday dinner. I swallowed. And with whatever courage I could scrape together in that moment, I opened the menu. The number inside nearly knocked the air out of my chest. $3,462. Not 346. Not 3 or 400. But over $3,000 for a 2-hour dinner full of imported wines, dishes I couldn't even pronounce, and desserts I'd never seen before. Me, the woman with exactly $49 left in her account. The woman who'd been drinking instant coffee these past few months, instead of buying her usual ground beans because saving a little won't hurt, was being asked to pay a bill over $3,000 while a whole table full of strangers waited for my answer. I forced a smile. Or maybe my lips just twitched while my heart dropped straight through me. I felt the tremble in my fingers as I turned the page. It took me right back to the first time I stood inside that shop trying on a cheap wedding dress more than 40 years ago. Except this time it wasn't nerves, it was shame. Brianna placed her hand over Malik's and leaned in a little closer to me. "Your bakery's real famous, right? Must have done great this month. And, well, family shares with each other. Nobody's thinking too much about it, Mother. Nobody's thinking too much." Right. Except me thinking so much, my chest felt tight. I breathed in deep, feeling like even the air in the room was holding still, waiting to see what I'd do. The ceiling lights reflected off Brianna's cream-colored dress, making her look like she'd stepped out of some magazine. And there I was in my simple black dress, same one I'd worn the last 3 years whenever I didn't know what else to put on. People started talking again. But now, the topic wasn't food or travel. It was me, or more exactly, their expectations of me. I caught pieces of it. "She lives with the kids now, so she must be doing fine. I heard the bakery stays busy. Well, tonight's special anyway." They spoke like I wasn't sitting right there, like I was just some side character in a story they were telling. They didn't know that these past 5 months, ever since I moved in with Malik and Brianna, everything had changed. I'd sold my old car to cover my brother's hospital bills, cut my hours because my knee's been giving out, ate leftover pastries from the shop instead of buying fresh groceries, and almost none of them knew that. Definitely none of them cared. I looked at Malik. He stared down at his phone, dodging my eyes. And that right there, That's when my heart cracked again. I raised that boy 20 years with these worn out hands, put him through college, worked double shifts every Christmas so he could buy his textbooks, and now he couldn't bring himself to say even one sentence. I got it, Mama. Don't you worry. Nobody at that table knew what I really had in my account. Nobody knew how I stretched every cent. Nobody saw the way being placed between luxury and my private poverty felt like being exposed under a spotlight. I closed my eyes for 1 second. If I stayed quiet, they'd think this was normal. If I agreed to pay, I wouldn't have money to make it through the week. And if I refused. But my pride, the little bit I had left after these months, told me it was time to say something. I set the menu down, not hard, just steady enough that everyone around the table felt something shift. My voice came out rougher than usual. There's something I think everyone here needs to know. The table went silent. All those eyes waiting on me. And in that moment, right before the truth spilled out, right before everything I'd been swallowing for months rose to the surface, I realized something. Tonight wasn't just a birthday dinner. Tonight was the night I couldn't stay silent anymore. I opened my eyes, lifted my head, and for the first time in a long time, I chose myself. I knew everybody at that dinner table was waiting for me to finish what I'd started to say. But before I could get a single word out, my mind pulled me back a few months to when everything first started slipping out of my hands little by little, the way flour scatters across the wooden counter I've used every morning in my little bakery. I've run June's Hearth for almost 23 years. In the black neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, ain't nobody who doesn't know my sweet potato pie. That smell, sweet potato roasting with butter and cinnamon, is tied to our memories across generations, in kitchens where Black women gathered to cook and talk, laugh and sigh. That's how our culture gets passed down, through our hands warm, steady, and resilient, just like us. I used to be so proud of that. I used to think I'd keep that place running till these hands couldn't hold a whisk anymore. But life don't wait for nobody. When my knees started aching, I cut my hours. Then I sold my old car to pay my brother's hospital bills. Operating costs went up. I had to remove items from the menu, cut employees, do almost everything myself. I didn't tell Malik. I didn't tell anyone in the family. That's how our culture raises us. Black women always got to be strong, always got to stand tall through it. We rarely let ourselves break because breaking means getting left behind. Some nights I stood in that empty shop, the only sound the ticking clock, kneading dough while tears slipped down without me even noticing. I wondered, should I just close up? But then I'd remember the older Black ladies who stopped by for a slice of sweet potato pie and told me stories about their grandbabies, the church choir, the sisterhood drama. I'd remember the neighborhood kids running in every Friday afternoon for a tiny muffin. That bakery wasn't just a job, it was the place where I felt real, where things still made sense. But then came that gray, heavy morning. I was dusting powdered sugar on fresh coffee donuts when Brianna walked in. She wore her office clothes, heels clacking like she owned the floor. Her voice was soft, but cold enough to sting. You should live with us. Staying alone like this is dangerous. What if you fall? And if you transfer the house into our names, your assets will be better protected. She didn't ask what I wanted. She said it like I was supposed to thank her. I looked at her, those perfectly done eyes, long acrylic nails tapping on my old wooden counter. I knew her type. The new generation Black women, confident, high earning, living in shiny luxury apartments with light wood floors, weekend brunches, hot yoga. But I didn't tell her that. I just nodded, trying not to show how tired I really was. She went on about benefits, insurance, tax efficiency, Malik's future, and the future of their kids. My head spun. Then she said one last thing. This is how modern families operate, Mother. And it felt like she was pulling me right out of the world I belonged to, a world untouched by cold paperwork and strategic calculations. And then I signed. I signed not knowing that signature was the last thread tying me to my own home. After I moved in with Malik and Brianna, everything changed faster than I could breathe. They gave me a small room next to the garage, told me it was temporary until the main room gets fixed. But that temporary stretched from week to week through the whole summer until I realized there had never been any plan to fix a thing. That little room was my place. Period. It was cold at night. The scent of motor oil hung in the air. The walls were thin. I could hear them arguing every time they shut their door. I set a few embroidered cloths my mama made on the shelves, trying to bring a touch of old black home warmth to it. Every month, Brianna handed me $150 and called it. He never asked if I had enough to eat. Never asked if I could still handle making 3 batches of pastries a day. Never asked anything. The day I realized I wasn't seen as part of the family anymore was the day I stood in their kitchen preparing roasted sweet potatoes. I was seasoning them the way my grandma taught: brown butter, cinnamon, nutmeg, molasses. When Brianna walked in, wrinkling her nose, "Oh my God, that smell is too strong. Can you not make that during the week?" I'm allergic to the smell of cinnamon. Allergic to the smell of cinnamon, the very thing that fed my family for 4 generations. I didn't answer, just nodded like a machine. But inside, it felt like a piece of my culture of me was being erased in a house that was no longer mine. And week after week, they kept bringing me to those expensive dinners where I sat quietly, trying not to convert every dish into how many days of work it cost me. Those evenings made me feel smaller and farther away from my own son. Those things I never told anybody, because I'm a black woman and we're taught from young that we gotta be strong, gotta endure, gotta be the pillar of the family. The night Brianna pushed that bill toward me and asked me to pay more than $3,000 in front of all those people, that was the moment I understood. My silence had been the bridge they walked over without ever looking back. And before I could speak the truth at that table, I knew I had to start from the beginning, because everything that led to that night didn't happen by accident. It was the slow result of months and months of me losing pieces of my own worth without even realizing it. I don't know how other people feel when their whole world shrinks down to a little room barely half the size of the storage closet in a bakery. But I remember clearly the first day I stepped into that space, next to the garage, the dim yellow bulb dangling from the ceiling, the thin mattress I had to lay a towel over because of the damp smell rising from it. I stood there, in a space once meant for toolboxes and old storage bins, and it felt less like I was moving into my son's home, and more like I'd been placed in emergency shelter after a natural disaster. I always thought black women raised in the South had a higher threshold for hardship. We grew up hearing, "Baby, life gonna be hard, so you gotta be harder." I carried that with me my whole life, through night shifts at the corner store, through hauling 50-pound bags of flour across my bakery floor. But I never thought that strength would have to be used just to survive inside my own child's house. My room had exactly one small window, almost entirely blocked by a shelf stacked with shoeboxes, drills, and coils of extension cords. I cleared a little space so sunlight could slip in. That faint light flickered across peeling paint, like the thin breath in my chest on nights when sleep wouldn't come. The sound of neighbors' cars, the garage door creaking, the wind hissing through the cracks, all of it echoed like loneliness. I used to be surrounded by voices, customers chatting in my bakery, soft gospel floating through the radio as I baked for Sunday service. But here, all I heard at night was the damp quiet of a place I didn't belong to. I tried to make that makeshift room feel like a home. I draped my mama's purple floral tablecloth over the little space heater. I hung 2 family photos on the wall, but the nails kept slipping out of the cement. I put a small radio on the shelf and played soft Ella Fitzgerald every evening, because at least Ella's voice made the room feel less empty. But nothing could fix the feeling of being moved aside, like someone had lifted me out of my real life and set me in the far corner of theirs. That feeling of living close to your family, and yet being farther away from them than miles could measure. That feeling of being shrunk, pushed back, turned into a shadow. Some evenings, I sat on that mattress, knees pulled to my chest, listening to their laughter drift in from the living room. Laughter I was never invited into. I'd try stepping out, asking if they needed anything or offering a new pie I'd made, but Brianna would just say, "Oh, Mother June, you go rest." We're talking work stuff, kinda not the right time. Not the right time. Those two words shut a whole door in my face. I learned to stay quiet, to walk softly through that house like an uninvited guest. Every morning, I slipped out early before they woke, just so I wouldn't hear Brianna's sweet but distant voice calling. Morning, Mother June. Remember to leave your shoes out in the garage. One afternoon, when I came home from a shift at the bakery, I heard Brianna on the phone. She didn't know I was standing behind the door. Yeah, she's staying with us. It's fine, just a lot to manage. Old school black mother in laws, you know? They think they gotta handle everything. But whatever. We got it. I stood there, my hands twisting together until the knuckles went white. Old school black mother in law. It was true, and it was wrong, and it was painful all at once. True because our generation of black women gave everything we had so our kids could breathe easier. Wrong because that didn't mean we didn't deserve care or respect. Painful because strength don't mean we don't feel the hurt. After I moved in, I stopped getting invited to Sunday church meetings, stopped hearing the choir practicing His Eye is on the Sparrow, stopped cooking with the sisters in the kitchen ministry for community lunch. I missed the smell of coconut oil in their hair, the warm hugs when life got heavy. I missed being seen, being part of a community that held each other up. One night, I got home late after closing the bakery. Chicago wind cut across my face like a blade. When I stepped into the garage, Brianna was stacking more boxes into my room. I asked gently, "What you doing, baby?" She answered without looking up, "Just clearing space. Your room still has plenty of room, plenty of room." I looked at that space barely enough for a mattress, a tiny shelf, and my old suitcase. But I didn't say a thing. I just smiled weakly, helped her move the boxes, and felt something in me drop 3 levels lower. Every time I thought I'd adjusted, something new would remind me I was not living my life. I was surviving in theirs. But the thing that pushed me closest to the edge wasn't the cramped room or the cold distance. It was the money. I always thought Malik quiet as he was still cared. But every time I brought up household expenses or asked whether the main room could be fixed for me to use, he'd say, "We'll figure it out. Just not a good time right now." And somehow, it was never a good time. In our culture, parents sacrificing for their kids is normal. But children using that sacrifice? No. That crosses a line every black woman understands. Our pride may not be big, but it is iron strong. And once somebody bends it too far, we become someone else. I remember one night, I turned on the radio and Mahalia Jackson came on. "Take my hand, precious Lord," and the tears just spilled down my face. Not because of the melody, but because Mahalia always sounded like she was holding the torn souls of this world. And right then, I realized I had become one of those torn souls. I didn't recognize myself anymore. My silence had become the excuse for them to treat me like something guaranteed, something obvious, something less. And then came the night Brianna slid that bill over $3,000 across the table toward me. The night everything inside me snapped together. That night, I knew it was time for me to speak the whole truth. What I didn't know was that my words would unravel something far bigger, a story about betrayal, dignity, and the right to live as a full human being, a story that had been waiting quietly, painfully to be told. Thank y'all for sticking with us all the way to this point. If you busy or gotta go right now, hit that like button so you can find this video easy later. All right now, let's get back to the story. I remember that afternoon clear as day, the kind of gray Chicago evening that wasn't quite cold, but wasn't warm either. Half spring weather where the air carries a little damp earth and a hint of wood smoke from somewhere in the neighborhood. I was sitting at the low table in my little room by the garage, stitching up a loose seam on an old sweater. It's a habit I inherited from my mama and my grandmother. Black women don't throw out anything that can still be saved. Fixing a loose seam is like patching a piece of your life, holding on to what you got, even if it ain't new anymore. Malik stood in my doorway. He knocked softly, but didn't wait for me to answer before pushing the door open. The hall light framed his face, and I could see the uneasy look he wasn't even trying to hide. "Mama," he said, eyes doing everything except meeting mine. You want to come eat with us tonight? It's Brianna's daddy's birthday. Her whole family's going to be there. I paused. Malik hardly ever invited me anywhere. All these months, living under the same roof, he always found some way to bury himself in work or let Brianna do the talking. So when he stood there, voice sounding almost genuine awkward, but real, my heart softened despite itself. A little flicker of hope sparked inside me. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe he remembered I existed. Maybe he wanted me there, as part of the family. I looked up and asked quietly, "You think I should go, baby?" Malik nodded too quickly, like he was afraid I might change my mind. "Yes, Mama, come. Brianna's dad want to meet you. And it's been a while since you've been out. It's been a while since you've been out." Those words caught in my throat. He was right. I had folded myself into that tiny room, disappearing from the world. The fact that Malik noticed even this late was enough to make me want to believe something good might happen. I stood up, smoothed my sweater, let me get myself ready. When Malik left, I sat at the edge of the bed and breathed slow. It had been so long since I had a reason to tidy myself up. Black women raised in communities like mine all know this. When you step outside, you show up right, not to impress folks, but to respect yourself. My grandmother used to say, "People gon' judge you anyway, so at least look like you belong to yourself." I opened my old suitcase. Inside were the few clothes I brought with me when I moved here, simple pieces, dark colors, easy to wash. But at the bottom, I found the dress I wore to a special church service last year. A midnight blue dress with a gentle cinch at the waist, soft and flowing. I'd felt beautiful in it, then quietly beautiful. I held it against myself, wondering if it still fit. Thank God it did. I sat in front of the little mirror on the shelf and began brushing my short silver curls. Every strand held a story, a past, a pain, and a pride. For Black women, our hair is our spirit. Even when it's silver, it's still our crown. I rubbed a little Minyak lavender oil into my hair until the room filled with that soft floral calm. Then I added a touch of powder, a bit of nude brown lipstick. I wasn't young anymore, but I wanted to look like me, the steady, gentle, strong version of June. Around 7 o'clock, Malik and Brianna were already dressed and waiting in the living room. Brianna wore a wine red fitted dress, hair sleek and straight, acrylic nails shiny and fresh. She walked down the stairs like the house was her stage. When she saw me, she smiled, but her eyes flicked over my dress with that quiet judgment I'd grown used to. "Mother June looks different tonight," she said, half compliment, half something else, but I just nodded. I wasn't giving her that power today. Malik looked at me a second longer than usual, like he finally noticed I had tried. That look alone lit a small belief inside me. If I stayed calm, maybe this night could be a new beginning. The restaurant Hamilton and Pearl was in River North, fancier than any place I had ever stepped into. Outside, big glass windows reflected streetlights and the night sky. Inside, everything smelled of herbs, melted butter, and good wine. White tablecloths, candles flickering, soft live jazz playing from a corner. A thin black woman with a tight afro was singing a cover of Etta James's At Last. Her voice was strong and sweet, and it took me right back to when I was young, singing in the church choir, never imagining how far my voice could carry. Brianna's family was already seated, loud, lively, looking wealthy in that modern city way. Sharp suits, glossy dresses, metal watches, expensive perfume. They greeted me politely, but from a distance, like they were shaking hands with a guest, not welcoming a future family member. I sat down, trying to hide how out of place I felt. The smell of food drifted around us, and my stomach tightened. But I knew better than to order anything expensive. I opened the menu, and the prices hit me like a wave. The cheapest thing was nearly $100. Brianna turned to me and smiled lightly. "Mother June, get whatever you want. Daddy loves fine dining, so tonight." That word felt like a joke. Everyone started ordering. Seared scallops, Wagyu steak, buttered lobster, a rare red wine. They talked about business deals, investments, upcoming trips to Italy. I stayed quiet. I ordered a salad and a glass of water, the only things I could choose without feeling guilty. While we waited for the food, I glanced around the restaurant. I saw older black women dressed beautifully, wearing big teardrop earrings, soft curls framing their faces. They laughed loudly, touched their husbands' or children's arms with pride in their eyes. I looked at them and wondered why I was sitting here, feeling like a stranger among my own family. I looked at Malik. He was laughing with Brianna's father, nodding along. The child I raised with love, with the bread I woke at 4 a.m. every morning to bake, now swallowed whole by his wife's world, far from the life I tried to build for him. And when the plates finally came out, I knew one thing for certain. This night wouldn't just be a birthday dinner, it would be a turning point. I just didn't know yet. That turning point was coming faster than I ever expected. The music in the restaurant shifted to A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke right as the entrees arrived. I couldn't tell if it was coincidence or some kind of warning, but that voice, heavy with sorrow yet full of strength, aching for freedom and soaked in endurance, hit me in the chest so hard it felt warm and burning. I looked around the table. Everybody was laughing, clinking glasses, talking about things that had nothing to do with the world I lived in: stocks, tech companies, Maldives vacation packages. Their laughter sounded like it was coming from another room entirely, while I sat there small in my midnight blue dress, trying my best to sit up straight so nobody would see how tiny I felt inside. My dish was set down in front of me: a little salad plate, a few apple slices, some greens. I thanked the server in a voice so soft even I barely heard it. Everyone else dug into their meals, knives and forks, hitting plates in bright, sharp rhythms. I cut tiny bites, pretending I wasn't starving since noon. Then they ordered dessert: molten chocolate cake, creme brulee, and a bottle of sparkling wine so expensive I'd never even seen the label before. Brianna leaned toward the server and said, "Go ahead and bring another bottle. Tonight's special." I glanced toward Malik. He still didn't look at me. He hadn't once asked if I wanted anything else. I told myself, it's fine. I can deal with it. We've lived our whole lives surviving off endurance. But the moment that endurance cracked, it came fast, sharp, and deep like a clean cut. The server walked over, placed the bill inside a glossy black wooden holder, and set it right in front of, well, you already know me. I looked at Malik. He kept talking to Brianna's father like nothing was happening. I looked at Brianna. She was smiling, that sweet, polished, icy smile that had cut me more times than I could count. She leaned in, placed her hand lightly on the bill, and slid it just a little closer to my side. "Mother June," she said softly but sharp as vinegar, "you cover this, okay? Tonight's also a chance for us to thank you for..." A word that sounded like gratitude, but was really manipulation dressed in silk. I opened the bill. The number hit me like headlights straight to the heart. $3,462. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the paper. My face flushed hot while my spine went cold. Brianna's father let out a loud laugh. "Wow, Miss June, you're generous." People around the table chimed in with soft little chuckles, like this was normal, like this was a role I should naturally play. But that wasn't my role. I didn't choose it. They shoved me into it. I took a long breath, trying to keep my voice from trembling. I I can't pay this." Brianna blinked, pretending to be surprised. "What? But you own a bakery, right? Didn't you say business was busy every month?" She said it loud enough for everybody to hear. I heard someone gasp, clearly thinking I was richer than I was. I felt stripped bare in front of them, like being poor was something to be ashamed of, like not being able to pay this bill was a failure, a flaw, a weakness. And the worst part, my son, Malik, said nothing. I turned to him, eyes begging for something. One sentence. One, "I'll handle it, Mama." Or at least one look that showed he cared. Instead, he swallowed, looked nervous, and muttered, "Uh, talk to Brianna. Not I'll take care of you. Not I won't let you be humiliated." I felt a door slam inside me. One of Brianna's aunts said Miss June can handle it. She looks strong, independent. They thought it was a compliment. In that moment, it was an anchor dragging me deeper. I looked back at the bill, and suddenly I saw all 3 months of that tiny room. 3 months of Brianna twisting financial talk into pressure. 3 months of Malik's silence. 3 months of me trying not to be a burden. All of it pressing on my chest at once. I set the bill down on the table and stood up. The chair scraped the floor with a loud, cutting sound that sliced through the chatter. Everyone turned to me. I looked straight at Brianna. My eyes weren't shaking anymore. No, I said slowly, I'm not paying. And I think even the singer paused at the microphone. I took a breath. I've got maybe a few dozen dollars in my account. My bakery is struggling. And for the past 3 months, I've been living in a room next to the garage. A soft clatter. Someone had dropped their fork. I kept going, my voice clearer. That room isn't a bedroom. It's storage. I was told it was temporary. But temporary never ended. I haven't been included in family dinners. I've been told not to touch the kitchen. I can't even make my traditional sweet potato dishes because they smell too strong. I turned to Malik. His head was bowed, and now I said, "You expect me to pay over $3,000 for this dinner?" No one spoke. No laughs. No glasses clinking. No forks tapping. The whole restaurant seemed to hold its breath. I rested my hand on the back of my chair, like it was the last bit of ground under my feet. "Enough," I said. "I'm not staying silent anymore." Every eye was on me, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt right. Then a voice rose from the far end of the table, a woman I hadn't paid much attention to until now. She stared at me, eyes wide with real shock. "Wait, what did you say? You live in the room by the garage?" And my daughter allowed that. I nodded. And right in that moment, when she stood up, anger flooding her face, but none of it aimed at me, I knew the whole night had shifted. The evening wasn't over, and the truth I had just spoken was only the beginning of the storm that was about to break. I remember that held breath in the room, a silence thick as a quilt, heavy and damp, settling over everyone at the table. No one expected me to stand up. No one imagined the things I'd just said. But the most shocked person wasn't Malik, wasn't Brianna. It was Brianna's mother, Miss Lorraine. She'd been sitting at the far end of the table, poised and elegant, her slim frame straight, her salt and pepper curls pinned neatly, a large pearl necklace resting against her chest, the kind of accessory older black women wear when they're headed somewhere important. I'd never really spoken to her beyond a polite handshake. She was the type of woman society respects, accomplished, sharp, dignified, the kind raised in the 60s and 70s, when black excellence wasn't just a movement but a responsibility black folks carried every day. And now, she was looking at me with something I'd never seen from her before: shock, sorrow, and anger on my behalf. "Miss June," she said softly as she rose from her seat. "You mean to tell me my daughter has you living in a room next to the garage?" I nodded. Just nodding made my throat tighten. Brianna immediately cut in, her voice sharp and cold. "Mom, I didn't make her live there. It was just temporary." "Mom, don't listen. Be quiet." Miss Lorraine's voice sliced through the air sharp as a blade, but commanding, regal. Right now, I had never seen a woman silence an entire table with 2 words, but she did. And in that moment, my heart, squeezed tight for months, finally loosened. She turned back to me, her expression softening. "Are you—" My throat felt full of thorns. "Comfortable?" I hadn't been comfortable a single day. Not 1 hour. In the end, all I could manage was a small shake of my head. It took her 1 second to understand. Then her face darkened, like a storm rolling in. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping hard against the floor, loud enough to make a nearby server jump. "No, absolutely not." She spoke each word like a verdict. She turned her gaze on Brianna first, like a judge looking at a guilty defendant. "I raised you to respect people. Tell me, WHEN, did I ever teach you to put your mother-in-law in the garage? Brianna's face drained of color. Mom, you're misunderstanding. I understand perfectly. Then Miss Lorraine turned to Malik. And you, a black man raised by a mother who worked her hands raw to get you grown, you let your wife treat your mama like this? How do you hold your head up before your ancestors, knowing this? Those words sent a shiver down my spine. In our culture, ancestors isn't casual, it's sacred. It's lineage, sacrifice, blood, history. When an elder invokes the ancestors, the issue isn't just wrong, it's dishonorable. Malik finally lifted his head and looked at her, then at me. And for the first time in months, something like shame flickered in his eyes. Miss Lorraine turned to the server. Bring the bill. I'm paying. The table went silent as a tomb. No one here is responsible for this dinner. This is my fault for not knowing sooner. I stepped forward, whispering, You don't have to. But she laid her hand gently over mine and squeezed, I do. Her voice softened but stayed firm. It had been months since anyone touched my hand with care. This touch wasn't ownership. It wasn't control. It was support. When the bill arrived, Miss Lorraine signed it without even glancing at the amount. We're leaving, she said. June, you're coming home with me tonight. One night is enough, but you are not returning to that room. Brianna jumped up. Mom, we're fixing her room. It's fixing what? Fixing stories to fool people. She didn't raise her voice, but Brianna sank right back down. I turned to Malik. He opened his mouth. Mama, please don't go. Let me. You, I asked quietly, but my voice landed hard. For 3 months, you didn't ask how I was living, didn't ask if I had money, didn't ask if I was okay. And now you want me to trust you. Malik lowered his head again. I turned away. When we stepped outside, the Chicago night wind hit hard, but I could breathe easier out there than I had in that garage room for months. Miss Lorraine draped her coat over my shoulders. It's cold. Wear this. I pulled it close, and for the first time in so long, I felt wrapped in something I thought I'd lost kindness. Her SUV pulled up. She opened the passenger door for me. Come on. Tonight you stay with me. I will not let an elder live like that. I will not let a mother live like that. I will not let a black woman live like that. Those last 3 lines, they weren't just a promise. They were a vow. In the car, she turned on the radio, a quiet old gospel tune. His Eye is on the Sparrow, a song I'd cried to more times than I could count in that small room. But tonight, I didn't cry from pain. I cried because someone finally stood up for me, because someone finally saw me. Not as a burden, not as a household ornament, but as a human being. When we pulled up to her home, a navy blue 2-story house glowing under warm porch lights, she said, June, you're not going back there. Tomorrow we deal with this properly. From this moment on, no one gets to disrespect you again. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the lit windows. Tonight was the first night in months that I felt I had a place to stand. The first night I was treated like a human being, and I knew my life was about to turn in a new direction. Not because I was suddenly stronger, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone refused to let me fight alone. We put a whole lot of time and heart into bringing this story to life. If you don't like it, go on and hit that like button. And if you do like it, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Now then, the next morning, when the sunlight was still thin like a sheer veil, I woke up in the guest room at Miss Lorraine's house. For the first time in months, I slept straight through the night, no creaking garage door, no smell of motor oil creeping into my dreams. Just the scent of vanilla candles, a faint radio humming somewhere down the hall, and the sound of Miss Lorraine making coffee in the kitchen. I sat up and saw a pair of soft slippers placed neatly beside the bed. A small gesture, but one that warmed and hurt my heart at the same time. I'd grown so used to being treated like I was invisible that a simple act of kindness felt almost too heavy to hold. When I came downstairs, Miss Lorraine set a mug of hot coffee with milk in front of me. and a warm corn muffin she'd made herself. June. Today we're going back to get your things, she said, calm, direct, as if it were the only plan that made sense. I wrapped my hands around the mug. You don't need to come with me. Yes, I do. She looked straight at me. I want to be there when you walk into that house. I want them to see you're not walking in alone anymore. Those words hit me right in the throat. Not because they were beautiful, but because they were true. When we arrived at Malik's house, the air was still sharp with morning cold. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the gray house with its neat patch of artificial lawn. The one Malik once bragged was easy to maintain. The front door was spotless. But to me, everything behind it held the weight of months in which I'd been shrunk down into a shadow. Brianna opened the door before I could even press the bell. She stood there with her arms crossed, eyes flicking from me to Miss Lorraine with a mix of panic and irritation. Mom, why'd you bring her here? Miss Lorraine didn't answer right away. She stepped inside without asking permission, without waiting to be welcomed, moving with the authority of a woman who knows exactly what she's worth. I'm here to make sure June gets all of her belongings. Brianna pulled the door open wider, forcing a steady voice. Her room is still intact. We didn't throw anything out. I followed Miss Lorraine into the house. It looked exactly the same as the night before. Clean, stylish, cold. The walls were lined with framed vacation photos of Brianna and Malik. Jamaica, Paris, Miami. Not a single picture of me. Not a single sign I had ever lived here. Except for the room by the garage. When I opened that door, the familiar damp chill rushed up at me like a bad memory. The narrow bed I slept on for 3 months was still there, the mattress dented where my back had rested. The wooden shelf above the bed was still loaded with their storage boxes. A sliver of weak light pushed through the tiny window. Miss Lorraine stepped inside, scanned the room, and said in a low, cutting tone, June, this is not a place for a human being to live. Just one sentence, but it confirmed everything I had feared and never dared to say aloud. I bent down to gather my things, hands trembling. There weren't many, just enough for one suitcase and a big cloth bag. Each item I picked up, my old nightgown, my mother's embroidered towel, the little radio carried a quiet ache. 3 months of my life, folded into a handful of objects. While I packed, Malik appeared in the doorway. He didn't look at me, as if eye contact would burn. Mama, don't misunderstand. We were going to fix the main room for you. We just been busy this month. I looked up at the sun I once believed would stand beside me when life hit its hardest. How many times have you said that, Malik? Once? Twice? Or 10 times? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I continued. You didn't even ask if I was sleeping okay. Didn't ask what I was eating. Didn't ask if my back hurt. You didn't ask me anything. Brianna cut in, voice shaky but stubborn. June, you never said anything. How were we supposed to know you weren't comfortable? Didn't know. I let out a brittle, broken laugh. A room by the garage wasn't enough of a clue? Putting storage boxes over my bed wasn't enough? Telling me I couldn't cook my family's sweet potato recipe wasn't enough? Telling me I couldn't sit at the dinner table wasn't enough? The air thickened like syrup. Then my eyes caught a shoebox under the bed. I didn't remember putting anything inside it. I pulled it out, brushed off the dust, opened the lid. Inside were papers I thought I'd lost. Old insurance forms, my worn ID card, and right in the middle, the original stack of documents for my house, bought over 20 years ago. Next to them was a photo. Me standing in front of the house the day I bought it, Malik still a little boy, smiling wide, my hand resting proudly on his shoulder. I stared at that photo for a long time. The woman in it felt like someone else, stronger, steadier, fuller of faith than the woman I'd become. Miss Lorraine leaned down, saw the papers, the photo. When she looked back up, her eyes were burning with a deeper, heavier anger. But she signed the papers to put it in Malik's name. We didn't do anything wrong legally. Maybe not, Miss Lorraine said, her voice dropping into a growl, but morally, you two are dead wrong. Malik stepped fully into the room. Mama, I know we didn't handle things right, but I promise we'll fix it. You can stay. We'll redo everything. I stood up and closed my suitcase. No, Malik, I don't need a room. I don't need the money you give me. What I need is the thing I lost: respect. And I cannot find that in this house. His lips parted, but no words came. His eyes were wet, but no tears fell. I walked past both of them, pulling my suitcase behind me. Each step hurt, but each step also stitched me back together. At the doorway, I turned around one last time. Brianna, you can keep everything in this house if you want, but that house, the one in the photo, the house I spent my whole life working for, I'm taking it back. I don't know how yet, but I will. No one said a word. Outside, the wind whipped through the yard, scattering dry leaves across the driveway. I pulled my suitcase toward Miss Lorraine's car. When the door closed behind me, I let out a long breath, and for the first time in months, it was the breath of a woman who had stepped out of her own grave. And whatever lay ahead, at least this time, I wasn't walking there alone. The next day, the sky over Chicago hung low and heavy gray, like the clouds were sinking, ready to brush the tops of our heads. I sat in the passenger seat of Miss Lorraine's car, my hand gripping the file folder, holding the documents I'd found in that shoebox. My heart beat fast, but not out of fear. For the first time in months, I was walking into it, June, Miss Lorraine said, her voice soft but firm. Things will get clearer once you speak to someone who knows the law, not to people who've been taking advantage of your silence. I looked out the window. My reflection stared back, pale, tired, but the eyes, those eyes had a spark I thought had died out long ago. We stopped in front of an old red brick building on the south side, the kind of place that used to be a hub for Black community organizing back in the 70s. On the glass door was a sign, Henderson and Cole, attorneys at law. The name Henderson made me think of Reverend Henderson from back in the day. He used to tell us, justice don't fall from the sky. You gotta name it, demand it, and protect it. I drew a deep breath and stepped inside. Attorney Henderson was not what I imagined a lawyer to look like. He was a Black man in his 50s, solid build, bald head shining, round frame glasses. His office walls were covered with degrees, and family photos him with his wife and kids outside a church, him shaking hands with a local pastor, him at his law school graduation. One photo stopped me cold. Him and his mother standing proudly in front of an old house, holding a sign that said paid in full, a pride that didn't need words. He shook my hand, warm, thick palm, the kind of hand that had worked more than just paperwork. Miss June, he said, I heard a little from Miss Lorraine, but I need to hear it from you, from the beginning, so I told him, my voice shaky, slow, sometimes breaking. I told him about the room by the garage, about the night I listened to Mahalia Jackson and felt like a damp cloth wrung out to the last drop. I told him about the house deed I signed without understanding. I told him about the dinner invitation, the way my son looked through me, the bill shoved my way like a cruel joke. I told him about the photo in the shoebox, me and little Malik, smiling in front of the house when it was still mine. I didn't look at anybody while talking, afraid I'd see pity. But when I finally lifted my eyes, I didn't see pity. I saw anger, clean, sharp, righteous anger. Attorney Henderson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. June. It may qualify as elder financial abuse. I froze. I don't want to call my own child that. You're not accusing him of anything, he said gently but firmly. I'm talking about behavior. The law looks at actions, not relationships. And what happened to you, based on what you've told me, is coercion, misinformation, and exploitation of trust. The words hit me like weight dropped straight into my chest. Coercion, misinformation, exploitation. Miss Lorraine rested a hand on my shoulder. June, the truth doesn't change just because we're scared to face it. I nodded, slow, painful. Attorney Henderson opened the folder on his desk. Let me see the documents you found. I handed him the stack from the shoebox. He examined each page, nodding. adding notes. Then he pulled out one I hadn't noticed, the transfer form Brianna had made me sign. He pointed to a paragraph. Right here. You see this line? The signer confirms they were fully informed, given time to review, and signed voluntarily without any pressure. Without pressure. But I remembered exactly how Brianna said, Mama, sign quick or we'll miss the deadline. I remembered her placing the pen in my hand. It's nothing, Mama, just paperwork. I remembered Malik's silence. Attorney Henderson looked straight into my eyes. June, I need to ask you honestly. When you signed this, were you fully informed? Did you have time to review? Did anyone suggest you get your own lawyer to go over it with you? They told me not to worry. They said it was to protect the family's assets. He nodded and let out a long breath. That's enough to begin an inquiry. Especially since the signer, meaning you, is an older adult in a dependent situation. Illinois law is very clear about this. My hands clasped together so tightly. My knuckles ached. I had never feared anything as much as the word investigation. Not because I wanted to shield Brianna, but because I didn't want to drag my own blood into something ugly. But I also knew this. I didn't deserve to be treated like old furniture shoved into a corner. I don't want to tear my family apart, I whispered. I just want what's fair. Attorney Henderson tilted his head, his gaze softening. June, sometimes fairness is the only way to save what's left of a family. Silence doesn't heal wounds, it deepens them. You're not attacking your son, you're protecting yourself. And you're protecting every other woman who might end up in your shoes. I looked out the window. People rushing past in the early winter cold. A young black couple crossing the street with their child in a bright red coat. And I realized something. If I stayed silent, I'd be teaching the younger women watching us that endurance was normal. That letting others dictate your life was normal. That love didn't need to come with respect. I couldn't teach that. I turned back to Attorney Henderson. So, what do we have to do? He nodded like he'd been waiting for that moment. First, I'm filing a request to review the notarization process. If the notary cannot confirm you understood what you signed, or if there was no proper explanation, the transfer can be voided. I blinked. Voided. Meaning, he said. Each word steady as stone, you could regain ownership of your house. And based on what you've told me, your chances are very strong. My heart thumped hard in my chest. Not from greed. Not from wanting the house back because it was pretty, but because that house was my life. The place where I raised my son. The reward for thousands of dawns spent kneading dough, aching wrists, stinging eyes from ovens full of bread. June, Miss Lorraine said softly, It's time to take back what's yours, I inhaled. Not the breath of a frightened woman, but the breath of someone finally standing upright after being bent too long. All right, I said, my own voice startling me with its strength. Let's do it. Attorney Henderson smiled. A small, weighted smile. You've endured enough, June. Now let justice do its part. I straightened my back and rested my hand on the folder in front of me. For the first time in months, the future didn't look like a tunnel. It looked like a road, hard, long, but open, with light waiting at the end. When I stepped out of Attorney Henderson's office that day, the early winter wind slapped cold against my face, but somehow my chest felt warm. Not a warmth from my coat, but from something deeper. The feeling of walking in my own body again, not as a shadow. For the first time in months, I wasn't moving like somebody trying to disappear. I was moving like a woman with a spine, a voice, and a name. I thought back to those 3 months in that little room by the garage. Every night was freezing. Every creak of that garage door yanked me awake. Every time I played Mahalia Jackson just to remind myself somebody in this world understood what it meant to be a black woman, to endure, to sacrifice, to be pushed aside in your own family, and still rise because something in you refuses to die completely. I realized I had let myself fade for far too long. I'd been shrunk down into something barely there, a shadow blending into boxes and tools, a shadow that cleaned up quietly, bowed its head, and stayed silent on cue. But I was never a shadow. I am June Parker, a black woman who has lived long enough to know that silence never saved a family. It only taught them I accepted the way they treated me. The days after that, I stayed with Miss Lorraine. And somehow in her home, I found pieces of myself lying around like things I'd dropped along the road. My laughter, my breath, my sense of being human again. Miss Lorraine wasn't a talkative woman, but every word she spoke felt like a shield held in front of me. In the mornings, she played old gospel, the choir blending with the whoosh of her coffee maker, the warmest sound I'd heard in months. In the afternoons, she'd ask what I felt like cooking, and when I baked my family's sweet potato dish, she closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and said, "Now that is the smell of home." I broke down right there. Not because of the dish, but because of that one sentence. A sentence that proved something I thought I'd lost. I still mattered. I could still create warmth. I was still someone. And Malik and Brianna? I didn't hear from them the first day. 2 days later, Malik called, but I didn't answer. I knew what I'd hear. Empty apologies, rehearsed excuses. We were busy, we didn't mean it. Mama, you misunderstood. I love my son. That part has never changed. But sometimes, to keep that love alive, you have to love it from a distance. A week later, Malik came to Miss Lorraine's house. He stood on the porch, hands stuffed in his pockets, looking worn down. When I opened the door, he only said, "Mama, come home." But the home he meant was no home to me anymore. Not a place that put me in a garage. Not a place where a mother was treated like a burden. From now on, I said, "If you want to talk to me, you talk to the lawyer. And before that, you talk to your own conscience." Malik bowed his head, his shoulders trembling, but I didn't put my arms around him like I always had. This time, I held myself. While Attorney Henderson worked on the case, I started going back to my bakery. Not to reopen it yet, but to remind myself I once had a whole life, a full life, that didn't depend on anybody. When I unlocked the door, the smell hit me. Old flour in the wood, butter baked deep into the counters, and something like the memory of every batch I'd ever made. The walls still held photos of customers grinning wide, kids holding muffins with both hands. On the counter, a faded card remained. "Thank you, Miss June, for the best cake of my life." I stood in the middle of the bakery, arms wrapped around my chest, and for the first time in a long while, I breathed with my whole chest, not just a corner of my heart. That's when I understood. I wasn't just the victim of a signature. I was a survivor, a woman standing back up, a woman daring to claim herself again. That evening, sitting on Miss Lorraine's porch with cups of licorice tea, listening to cars hum past, she turned to me and asked, "June, after everything, who do you think you are now?" I stayed quiet for a long, long moment. The wind sifted through my hair, bringing the smell of wood and nighttime city air. Then I said, "I used to think I was just a mother abandoned by her child. But I'm not. I am a woman who stood back up after being pushed down. I am a black woman carrying the strength of everyone who came before me. I am a woman who learned that silence can kill you and speaking can save you. And I am a woman who will take her house back." Miss Lorraine smiled. A rare smile, warm as a lamp in winter June. "You're not just taking back your house," she said. "You're taking back yourself." I leaned my head against the wooden wall and watched the streetlights glow against the dark sky. The fight ahead is still long. Attorney Henderson has a mountain of work ahead of him. I have 1,000 pieces of pain to sort through. Malik has lessons he should have learned long ago. And my heart still has cracks that need healing. But one thing is certain. I will never again be the shadow in the garage. That night, I slept in peace. Not because the battle was over, but because, for the first time, I knew I was walking in the right direction. If you were me, do you think you could forgive a child who stayed silent while you suffered? Would you have the courage to stand up to your own kin just to protect your dignity? Leave me a comment and tell me how you feel. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and follow the channel for more real-life stories full of truth, shadows, and strength. Thank you for staying with me till the end.